Welcome to Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, back again with another episode, y'all. In this episode, I'm going to be doing something that I've never done before. I received a letter from a former correctional officer. I'm not going to divulge if the officer is male or female, but what I will divulge is that this officer is from another state, okay? I think that's important to know. This story is very compelling and revealing. I hope as you listen to the episode, you learn a lot about the mindset of officers and how some of their responsibilities affects their daily lives. So with that said, sit back and enjoy the show. I'm going to start out by reading the letter, parts of the letter, but I'll be drifting in and out where I'll be reading the letter and then some of it will be me. So you're just going to have to follow along with me because I think that that's the only way that I'm going to be able to do justice with this letter. I had to read it several times to understand and have several conversations with other people before I could fully understand what the officer is trying to say. But I get it now, and I'm going to be sharing my insights with you about this very important topic that is going to be revealed to you in a few minutes. But I'm going to read the first part of the letter to you, and then I'm going to get to what this whole episode is all about. It starts out, Dear Joe, I've been listening to your show since the very beginning. I am a true fan. Your insights and perspectives are refreshing. I must admit that when I first started to listen, I thought it wouldn't last because no one would support a convicted felon speaking out against crime. To my surprise, you have not only survived, you're thriving. Congratulations. I don't agree with all of your thoughts and ideas, but I do admire your courage. The story that I'm writing you about is something that correctional officers have to deal with on a daily basis. It's called compassion fatigue. Now, let me stop right there for a second and do my best to describe to you what compassion fatigue is. Compassion fatigue, to my understanding and after my research, is when an individual, let's speak from forms of correctional officer, a correctional officer observes an incident, whether it be a stabbing or them taking somebody to the hospital or anything like that, and they are not allowed to express their emotions. Like the story that this individual is talking about is about someone that they had to transport to the hospital. This individual lived in the housing unit that they were in charge of at different times. You know, shifts are different, so they might work in this building one day and another building the next day. But this individual worked in the building from time to time with the inmate. And this inmate had a heart attack. And this particular day, the officer was assigned to whatever detail that takes people back and forth to the hospital for medical emergencies. And on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, the officer is observing the inmate in distress. And the EMTs are doing everything that they need to do, but the inmate is still slipping away. After a couple of minutes, the inmate dies. And the officer, well, let me back up. While they're doing the CPR and all of the other things, the officer is watching the inmate's eyes. And they say that the way that the fear that the inmate had in his eyes, not wanting to die, was telling. And they just couldn't understand well, it's not that they couldn't understand. They could not. Uh, they were disturbed because they could not comfort the inmate. They were concerned about doing anything that would be viewed as showing compassion to this person, this human being in this situation. And they say that they saw tears running down the face of the inmate. And after a few minutes, the inmate dies. They don't pronounce the inmate dead. They wait until they get to the hospital, but they are a few minutes out. They're still riding, and they've stopped doing whatever they were doing. I don't know if that's procedure or protocol. That's not what this show is about. But they proceed on to the hospital, continuing to do some chest compressions, but it is what it is. And the officer finds themselves, and I'm trying to tell this story without revealing if it's a male or a female, but the officer is looking at the inmate, eyes still open. They haven't even shut the person's eyes yet. And they want to do something, hold his hand, say something comforting, even though the inmate is dead, but they don't. They just sit there. And then when they get to the hospital, they take him in and they tell the doctor that he's been non-responsive for at least 5 minutes. So they call it. And the officer has to go about doing all the paperwork, getting everything done, and then returning back to the prison. When the officer returned back to the prison, they, do what they do, turn in all the equipment, hand in the paperwork, blah, 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 all of this kind of stuff. This is what, I was told. And then the officer is told to report to a post. Now, the part about this that gets me is that the officer is in distress. There's no counseling, nobody to talk to, no way to get out those feelings that they have, because from what the officer is telling me is that they had developed some type of rapport with the inmate because they, from time to time, worked in the housing unit that they lived in. And no matter what they say about the rules or the regulations, sometimes you develop a rapport. It's not quite a relationship, whether it be, just being cool with somebody or whatever, but you develop a rapport where you say good morning to people, how you doing, this, and that. And it's not strictly, saying it because you don't care. It's like, how are you doing today? What's going on? And this, and that. Just trying to get a feel for you. And over time, it's like, how's your mom doing? Or are you doing okay today? Do you need to talk to anybody about it? That stuff happens in here. And that's the type of rapport that this officer had developed with this guy. And watching him die, they couldn't even show compassion by holding his hand, saying any kind words, letting them know that they were not alone in their last minutes of life. And that officer has to carry that for the rest of their lives. That weight. And from what I understand, what I'm reading in the letter, is that bothered the officer. That weight. And then when they got back to the prison, they were told to report to their post to do the rest of the shift that they had, right? They had 4 more hours of work to do. So they reported to the unit that they had to oversee doing their regular job while they're in total distress. And what I was told is that after they got home, they broke down to their loved one. They broke down and cried because that burden of not being able to express how they feel to another human being because the job doesn't allow it, it weighed on them. And they said that the institution or the Department of Corrections, they have a mechanism where you can ask for therapy and so on and so forth, but they don't do it. For whatever reason, the officer did not do it. And over time, they started to notice a change in their behavior. 3 months later, out of trying to protect themselves from that type of pain again, they resisted in developing those type of connections with the people in prison that they had to supervise. And in over 6 months, they noticed that they became callous toward the guys. And after 9 months, they said that they noticed that they were treating them in a more disrespectful way than they ever had. And after a year, they had to quit. They couldn't take it anymore. They knew that what they were doing was wrong, but it had become a coping mechanism to make sure that they couldn't lose their job, they wouldn't lose their job. They resisted in developing these bonds because they didn't want to develop these bonds and then experience a trauma in the event that something happened and that person died. And by not being allowed to express how you really feel towards another human being, regardless of the fact that they are in prison or not, it'll weigh on you. And from my understanding, that's called compassion fatigue. Not being able to express how they really feel over time made them callous toward the individuals that they were in charge of supervising. And that is a part of being a correctional officer. And what they wanted me to know is that a lot of times when officers are distant towards us, it's not because that's what they want to do. It's because that's what the job requires. And I thought that was important enough to talk about, because a lot of times those of us in prison, we look at officers in a very negative way without realizing or taking into account what it is that that job requires them to do in relation to us. We think that they're doing it because they're just bad people or mean people. But according to this officer, that's not the case at all. Now, I don't know how many people do it because it's the job and that's what it requires, or that they're just mean people. I don't know. But according to this officer, there are more good people than bad people that do this because they don't want to lose their job. They got a family to take care of. And it made me think about being in a gang, watching somebody, whether you're in a gang or not, watching somebody get stabbed and not being able to express concern towards that individual because you're afraid that you might end up getting stuck. I don't know if that falls into the same category as compassion fatigue, but I don't see why it wouldn't. Because over time, when you watch people in here be abused, whether it be verbally or physically, and you don't do anything to express compassion towards that person or to help that person, you become callous towards other people in here, just so you can survive. And to me, that seems to be no different than what officers go through when they have to do that, put that wall up between us and them just to maintain employment. So it sounds to me like we have more in common than we would like to admit when it comes to this environment. And it sounds to me like on either side of it, it's an unhealthy way to conduct yourself. It's an unhealthy way to live. Because if your behavior towards another human being is one that won't allow you to express concern for that individual, demonstrate compassion for that individual, and by doing that you become a callous person towards that individual and other people, then what good long term does it do? How does that benefit society, whether it's coming from the officer side or the people that are locked up? It doesn't. We're all leaving out of these places hardened, more callous towards our fellow human beings, and I just don't see any good that can come from that. I don't see how you can open up that Pandora's box and control what comes out when the root of it is built on you not being kind to your neighbor, kind to another human being. What's going to come out of that Pandora's box is callousness, wickedness, indifference. And that's why our communities, when it comes from, the side of the fence of being somebody in prison, that's why our communities are not safe. We're in these facilities experiencing all of these traumas. And then we get out and we hold these traumas, we let it build up. We don't seek help. Most of the time the help is not there. And if you do seek help, everybody on the compound knows about your business. So we walk out of here with this compassion fatigue, mistreating the people that we love, mistreating the people that may be our neighbors, mistreating the people that may want to give us a chance, and not fully understanding why. And I think this is something that should be looked into. It has given me a different perspective when I think about officers, and I see officers now have a better understanding as to why they act the way they do. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. If I were told that I wouldn't get my paycheck because if I was working in a place like this, if I were told that I'm not going to get my paycheck if I develop some kind of inappropriate relationship, and then you got to keep in mind who's defining what type of relationship is inappropriate, I wouldn't do it either. But I would have to make sure that I fully understand what that's going to do to my psyche. That's the key. Understanding what that's going to do to your psyche. Because, I gave this a lot of thought before I decided to do this show. You can do your job without breaking the rules. You can do your job and treat another person like a decent human being without bringing in anything. Because I think that's why a lot of these walls are built. They don't want you to develop these relationships because they don't want the officers to be compromised. Now, that's my assessment. I don't know if that's the real reason or not, but that's my assessment. But if you do your job and treat people with respect, not this fake respect by, a lot of times in here, you'll have people that work in these facilities that say, "How you doing today, sir?" This and that. But they say it with this non-emotional feeling. It's like what they taught them on paper. This is how you talk to them. This is what you say. Doesn't mean anything. If somebody asks me how is my day, I would hope that they're being sincere when they ask me that and not just saying that because this is what they taught them to say, to how to communicate with me at the academy. Because if I say, "How you doing?" I really am concerned about how you're doing. I mean, I don't want to know your personal details, but are you having a good day? You know what I'm saying? And I would hope that you would, when you ask me how I'm doing, that you are being sincere about my day. We have to get to that point where we'll stop faking concern and be concerned. And I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. They want to fake concern because that's what the job requires. And then on our side of it, we want to fake concern because we're trying to get something. We got to quit doing that. None of that makes sense. It's not advancing the needle. It's not moving us forward to being better human beings towards one another. So what do you do about something like that? What do you do? You know, the officer didn't write me to ask for advice. They just wanted me to know so I could have a better understanding and do a show to give other people out there a better understanding that, you know, all COs are not bad. All people that work in prison are not bad people. I don't think the majority of people that work in prison are bad people. I just think that the training that they go through that says that people in prison are scum, and I understand why they do that. I don't agree with it. Because the truth of the matter is that people in prison, we are people that have made some bad decisions, horrendous decisions. And for the most part, whether you believe it or not, most people in prison regret those decisions. We just don't have a way to demonstrate that regret because we're cut off from everything and everybody. So you don't see the people out there, y'all don't see our growth. You don't see our transformation. And if you're not a family member, you most definitely don't see it because we don't get to talk to anybody outside the people that we can put on our phone list or the people that can visit us. So the society at large has no clue if a person in prison has changed or not. The only time the news people or the system is most of the time anyway talking about people in prison is when something negative has happened. They don't tell you that such and such that committed a violent crime 10 years ago or 15 years ago is now a teacher's aide or is now a landscaper or a barber or recreational attendant. They don't tell you that. They don't tell you that such and such has gone X amount of years without a disciplinary issue. They don't tell you that an inmate might be in here and save the life of an employee. They don't tell you that. But it happens every day. People in here have changed, but nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about it. And we live up to the expectations of the people around us. And that's another problem that we have in here. Because the people around us treat us in a negative way, so we live up to that negative expectation. And my thing to the people that work here and the people that live here in these facilities, Department of Corrections, is that both sides we have to do better. This show is important because I don't believe most people that work in corrections are bad. But it is equally as important because I want people to know that most people that are in prison have changed their lives. And when you talk about compassion fatigue, this officer has helped me to realize that it affects both sides. And both sides need to give some kind of benefit of the doubt to one another and treat each other decently. That's the point I wanted to make with this show. And I really hope that you get that. I hope that you come to understand that. So if you know somebody in prison or you know somebody that works in prison and you notice that they are acting a certain way, you know, callous and short with you and all, give them the benefit of the doubt. Sit down and talk to them. Whether they're in prison or they work in prison. Reach out and say, look, you can talk to me. Let them get that out. Because until you get that out, according to what the officer told me, because they were able to get some help, therapy. They have friends around them that they could let this stuff out to. And they were able to get this help and move on. So there is hope. There is hope for all of us. But you got to let that out. You can't carry that burden. You carry that burden, it could become too much for you. So there is help out there. Get you some help. Talk to the people around you. Find your therapist. Whatever you need to do. But understand that if you are in a situation where you're mistreating people, understand that that is not normal. It's not what you should be doing. And try to explore while you're doing it. Be curious about that. Be curious about that. And I'm going to leave you on that. And I hope that you've enjoyed this show. I hope you've gotten something out of it. Because I really have. This has been a topic that has fascinated me. I really appreciate all of y'all out there. It's been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.